What is God like? God is like a loyal, faithful, loving husband. A husband who doesn't give up no matter what, who endures through absolutely anything. So, what is knowing God like? It's like a marriage. And what are we like? We are like a wife, often a faithless wife. Welcome to the channel. This is Look and Live, and I've been going through this series looking at different pictures, metaphors, similes, and poetic language that God Himself uses to describe what He's like, so we can get to know Him. And many of them revolve around family. So this is the series we're doing, God is Family, and today we're starting a new subtopic of marriage. And I think I'm probably going to do several videos on this. Today, I wanted to focus in on the Old Testament story of God's marriage to the people of Israel. The whole nation, as a group, are married to Creator God, which is an interesting story. The prophets use lots of marriage language in various places. Today, I'm going to focus in on one passage in Ezekiel 16. Ezekiel is retelling the history of Israel in a poetic way. He's talking about how Israel was a poor nation, how they were on slavery in Egypt, and how God saw them, had compassion on them, and brought them out. Had a special relationship with that people, and He led them out of Egypt. So we're going to pick it up in Ezekiel 16. The whole chapter tells this story all the way through, but we're just going to go and read certain bits. The first section of Ezekiel 16 describes Israel as a baby whose mother and father despised it and have left it for dead, basically in a pool of blood. And Yahweh, the Creator God, comes along and rescues her and says, live. And the people of Israel live and grow, and they begin to flourish. And so God, looked after Israel, made them live and flourish. And then we'll pick it up when God comes back later, and Israel is more of a fully grown nation. The metaphor continues. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you, covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath, and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you, and put ointments on you. I clothed you with an embroidered dress, and put sandals of fine leather on you. I dressed you in fine linen, and covered you with costly garments. So this passage describes the Creator God who created the universe, having compassion on the nation of Israel, as though a man who finds a young woman who is of age, marriageable age, and he loves her, and he chooses her to be his own. So what's the defining characteristics of this metaphor? Love is number one, that God feels love towards His creatures, and towards a specific people He's chosen and He loves. And that love seeks a relationship. He seeks a close, intimate relationship with those people, and He's always been doing that because God is so relational. If you get anything out of this series of all these different relationships, human relationships, how they reflect God, is that God is deeply relational. God washes her. That's a standard thing to do before a marriage, and not for the groom to do, but for the bride to be washed before she's married. It's a standard part of Jewish marriage ritual. And then He establishes an oath. He says vows. We still do this at weddings today. We say vows. We promise things. Promise to be with them, promise to love them forever, promise to provide for them, or whatever it is in your specific vows. So God says vows to Israel, and He enters into a covenant. Covenant's a big word. It's not one we use every day, but it means a kind of contract, a relational contract. I think usually or always established with the blood being spilled. And God's covenant with Israel was at Mount Sinai after He'd rescued them out of Egypt, brought them into the wilderness. He was leading them to the promised land, and He was with them. He made a covenant with them at Sinai. He made a deal with them. He made a contract with them. Marriage is kind of peculiar as human relationships go, in that it has a contract attached, a legally binding document that codifies your relationship, that says you can't leave this person, says you can't go and be with anyone else. It says you're with them for life on penalty of, losing lots of money or many other things. Now, divorce has been majorly diluted in our culture today, as has marriage, and no-fault divorce came in, it's completely changed marriage. Marriage, used to be adultery or things like that, which would cause a marriage to break, only those type of things. But it's a legally binding relationship. Some people think it's not romantic or it's not good, but actually it's safe. It's a place of safety where both of those people know they can always be with that person, they can always rely on them. And there's witnesses and there's, reasons to keep to that. So that's what God's love is like for us as well. God makes covenants, he makes deals, contracts with human beings on earth and says, I will do this and you need to do that. But actually the amazing thing we'll see later is that God actually ends up fulfilling our side of the deal as well as his. But I don't want to explore that too much today, but just so you know. It's a relationship of belonging. He says about Israel at the end of this, and you became mine. Which, again, some people say is possessive or anything, but actually it's what love does. When you love someone, you don't want them to be with someone else. And the wonderful thing about God's relationship with Israel was that they belonged to each other. I reference Exodus 6, verse 7 again, that you will be my people and I will be your God. There's a radical belonging together. Just as in marriage and family, you say, this is my wife, she's mine, you can't have her. This is my husband, you can't have him. So God took ownership of Israel, protected them from foreign gods, from false ideologies, from false gods, from evil practices, took them out of literal slavery and idolatry, delivered them into a new land. He was claiming them for himself, and he also was going to be entirely theirs. There's that belonging. And so they enter into a lovely phase of the relationship, a kind of honeymoon phase, this picture of God and Israel. In Jeremiah 2, it says, this is what Yahweh says, I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness, through a land not sown. It talks about that honeymoon phase of their relationship. It was all lovey-dovey, everything was wonderful. And we read a little bit, go back to Ezekiel, read a little bit in Ezekiel earlier about how Yahweh was giving his bride all these wonderful gifts of garments to wear and sandals to wear, and it goes on like that, more and more lavish and elaborate gifts he gave her to raise her up, and how she actually became royal because of all that. And that's how marriage works as well, because if Israel marries God, Israel's status is very low, especially at the time that God chose her. She's a poor nation of not many people with not much power, no money, no influence. They're slaves in a foreign land, under the whip, dying, under horrible conditions. But God chose them. And because his status was so high, they get raised to his status. And this happens in marriage. If you marry someone who is royalty, you become royalty. It doesn't drag them down to not being royalty. It pulls you up to being royal. So the God of the universe, who is king of all things, married Israel, the people of Israel in the Old Testament. And that meant that they became royal. And it's just the same for us. If we join God now, God's now invited all people to come and join him in this marriage, a new marriage. I'll talk about that in a while, but a new marriage is that any person from any nation can come and be part of God's people. And being in that relationship means you are raised to a royal status because you are on the same plane as God. You're married to God, not as an individual, but as part of a people. You're a royal people. And she becomes rich as well. Why does she become rich? Because he has money. Because Yahweh, God, Creator God, has money. Israel gets the wealth and riches. And that's how marriage works, isn't it? That, if you marry someone who's rich, you become rich. Some people do that and get married just for that reason, which is obviously not good at all. But it's a beautiful aspect of marriage that a poor person and a rich person can get married. The poor person suddenly becomes rich. And it's like that if you join God in marriage. If you come and be a follower of Jesus, you are rich. I'm not talking about physical riches here. I'm talking about spiritual riches. The wonders of God's grace, his love, his peace, all of these beautiful blessings of knowing God are amazing riches, more than any money or gold could ever be. So he raises Israel up to be as wealthy as him and same status as him by marriage. But it doesn't go all roses after that. It all goes wrong. We read on in Ezekiel 16 from verse 15. But you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favours on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. Goes on and describes this in more and more detail, and eventually ends up saying that it describes her as a prostitute, Israel as a prostitute, as a nation, but actually explains that actually she was doing it for free or even paying them. So she wasn't really a prostitute as such, but just sleeping around, adultery, cheating, whatever you want to call it. This is a horrible turn in the story. Who saw this coming? God marries a people on earth and they turn away from him. They become prideful. They trust in their own beauty, forgetting that what we just said just now, it's God who made them beauty. It's God who adorned them and washed them, cleaned them, and put those garments on them and put, perfume and all the stuff on them that made them beautiful. And God made them in the first place. But then they turn away and say, no, I'll use what you gave me for other men. And this really highlights what God is like, because it's relational. When we think of maybe the big word like sin, doing wrong things, you might think of, breaking the rules, which is true. That's true. Or the scripture says that sin is a transgression of the law. It's going against God's law. And that's true. But it's also relational. Sin is relational. It's breaking a relationship with God. You see that very clearly in this metaphor, that when the Israelites went after other gods, when they devoted themselves to evil practices, and if you read the whole of Ezekiel 16, you'll see some of the evil stuff Israel was doing, pretty shocking stuff, because they went after other gods. They were doing very evil practices. But that it didn't just break the law, it also broke the relationship with God. It broke the metaphorical home that they had with God. It wrecked the home of God, and it broke his heart. This is what sin is like. It's relational, it's personal, it's not just a law. God is not just a judge, he is a judge, but he is also relational. He's also trying to be a husband, a father, a son, a brother to you. And all those things are relational. And when you sin against God and go against him, follow other things and put them first, it breaks the heart of God. God did this funny thing with a guy called Hosea, who wrote a book. He's a prophet. I can't remember whether he's later or earlier than Ezekiel. It's just all gone out of my head. Let's see if I've got it written down. No. But Hosea, I think it's earlier. Than this. Hosea is a prophet, and God tells him to go marry a prostitute. He says, go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to Yahweh. So he married Gomer, the daughter of Dilblaim, and she conceived and bore a son. That's Hosea 1. God told Hosea to go marry a woman who slept around, to go marry a woman who was actually a prostitute, an adulteress, a known cheater. And why did God do this? Because it represented God's relationship with the people of Israel. That the people of Israel had gone to other gods all the time and had broken his heart again and again. And so God made this poor guy, Hosea, go through that experience to know what God was feeling, to know what it was like for the people to keep cheating on God and be faithless. But the story doesn't end there. It doesn't end at the break, at the brokenness. God promises to be faithful despite everything. If we skip to Hosea 3, he says, Yahweh said to me, go and show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another man and an adulteress, love her, as Yahweh loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. And it's to do with idol worship, those cakes. So I bought her with 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lektheth of barley, and I told her, you are to live with me for many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way towards you. For the Israelites will live for many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or household gods. Afterwards the Israelites will return and seek after Yahweh their God and David their king, and they will come trembling to the Lord, to his blessings in the last days. So the end of the story is that even though the people of Israel are completely faithless and they keep running to other gods, they keep doing horrible, immoral things because they don't trust God and they don't want that relationship with him, they keep going for relationships with other things, gods which represent power, gods which represent fertility, God's roots represent crops and rain and all sorts of things. They keep going after these other things, and it's breaking God's heart, and it's broken the relationship. But God says, even though this relationship is broken, this marriage is done, I'm going to come and love you again. Just like he told Hosea to do, to love that woman again, even though she'd broken his heart and ruined, his life in many ways. But because God's love is unbreakable, unending, he said, Hosea, go back and marry that woman again. And Hosea had to actually buy her back. And the Ezekiel passage ends in the same way. God says, I will deal with you as you deserve, because you despised my oath by breaking the covenant. So it's not they get off lightly. There's a punishment, and that's the exile of the people of Israel. Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. Then you will remember your ways and be ashamed when you receive your sisters, both those who are older than you and those who are younger. I'll give them to you as daughters, but not on the basis of my covenant with you. So I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. That means Yahweh. Then, when I make atonement for you for all you have done, you will remember and be ashamed, and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation, declares the sovereign Yahweh. So God promises to repair this broken relationship. He's not saying, oh, I did something wrong, you did something wrong, oh, let's try and meet in the middle, let's go to couples therapy, although that's the way a human should react. Usually, because there usually is wrong on both sides. But here, God has done nothing wrong, and the people of Israel have done absolutely everything wrong, but he says, I'll take you back. This is picked up again in other prophets. It's picked up in Isaiah 54. God says, do not be afraid. You will not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will forget the shame of your youth, and remember no more the reproach of your widowhood. For your Maker is your husband. The Lord Almighty is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. He is called God of all the earth. And this passage, a bit like the Ezekiel one, is in a messianic setting. The Ezekiel one talks about the people of Israel will come and trust a David. This is well after the time of David. So he's talking about a king who will be like David. And this Isaiah passage comes after the very famous Isaiah 53 suffering servant passage. Talks about one who will be crushed for the sins of the people, yet will go into death and yet will somehow reign. Just before that, it talks about going to Zion, going to Jerusalem and announcing that God is king over all things. And after this, it talks about a great feast. And then it talks about the Gentiles coming in and being included as well. This is no coincidence that all these things happen together in Isaiah. There's going to be one who comes to Jerusalem and one who suffers horribly for the sins of others and is crushed and goes into the place of death, and yet God does not abandon him. He is vindicated and comes back. And that means that God is going to marry his people again. And that's not just going to be Israel, it's going to be Israel, and then he's also going to include the Gentiles. That promised Messiah is Jesus. It happened. Go read Isaiah 52, 53, 54, 55 and see the promise of Jesus, that in the time of the Messiah, God would become a husband to his people again. I'm going to discuss that more in another video because this is already really long, and I knew it would be. It's just so much to say about it. But there's a new covenant offered, a new contract, a new marriage contract offered. And that offer is in Jesus Christ. So come along next time, find out more about that. I'm probably going to do several marriage videos because there's so much in there. It's such a central image to explain the love of God for human beings, for his people. And in the Old Testament, it was only Israel. And in the New Testament, Israel has Gentiles grafted in as well to the new Israel. So God bless you guys. This is on the table for you. If you don't know it already, come and join God's family. And if you are in God's family, just enjoy it. This is such good news. Think about it all the time. And, come back, keep watching these videos, keep supporting me. Thank you, guys.